Welcome to Buckeyes Tomorrow Morning for Monday, July 10th. I'm your host, Tom Orr. The Indiana game is in 54 days. The game against Michigan in 138 days. We're having part two of our conversation today about guys who are on the Ohio State football team who are a little under the radar right now, but who might end up playing a bigger role this fall than you're probably thinking. You know, we talk a whole bunch about JT Tuimoloau and Jack Sawyer and Tommy Eichenberg, but there are other guys on this defense who are going to be playing a bigger role than you might expect. We're going to talk about 5 of them on today's show. We're going to be doing that with our good buddy Kevin Noon of BuckeyeHuddle.com. In case you missed it on Friday, Kevin and Tony and I did an hour-and-a-half marathon live show on YouTube, answering questions about recruiting and Big Ten road trips and hot dog eating competitions and a whole mess of other stuff. So you're going to want to check that out. If you have not seen that already, you can also find that on Kevin's podcast feed, the Big Me Kickoff podcast, and also as a bonus episode on the Buckeye Weekly podcast feed. So lots of content there for you. But Kevin, let's talk today about some of those underrated players on defense. And the defensive line, you talk about JT Tuimoloau, you talk about Jack Sawyer. Those are kind of the guys that are going to get all the attention this year on the edge. But it feels like Caden Curry might be someone who you saw little flashes last year, now in his second year with the program. It feels like this might be a year where he starts to take on a much more significant role, and it feels like people just really aren't talking about him right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think that everybody is just in love with talking about edge players and what they do, and that's just kind of where things are. I mean, Caden Curry is not going to be a guy that is going to be the first one you're going to see coming off of the bus, but he has gone out there and certainly been very productive in the minutes that he's had. I remember watching him in high school. I remember watching him on the All-Star circuit, and he was largely unblockable. Now, obviously, the degree of difficulty goes up as you go into the college game and you're a young guy, and there are guys out there that are still a couple years older than you in physical development and in gameplay. But I think he's somebody that certainly can get out there and cause some havoc. And we certainly have seen under the Larry Johnson system, the desire to roll guys in and out. And when Caden Curry was already seeing some time last year, that time is going to certainly be increased this year just as an older player. And I think that is just warranted with what we've seen kind of out of some flashes from him. So I think he's definitely the right player to start this list off with.
And let's kick inside real quick to the interior of the defensive line, because the guy who, I didn't even put him on this list when we were talking about who we're going to talk about today, but this is the guy who was kind of the inspiration for the thought about this series. And I want to talk about Ty Hamilton, because I think you look at the interior of the Ohio State defensive line and you ask someone to name one of the defensive tackles this year, and everyone's going to say Tyleik Williams, everyone's going to say Mike Hall, and justifiably so. Those two guys have been great. But Ty Hamilton feels like one of the, just like maybe the most underappreciated player on this team, and that may run in the family, because Devon Hamilton always kind of felt that way too, his older brother, who was also a heck of a defensive tackle a few years ago. Ty Hamilton came in, I think he was maybe one of, if not the lowest rated players in his recruiting class, and he's just been really solid his whole Ohio State career. He's been a very reliable piece on the interior of that defensive line. He's been pretty healthy. He's been an impact player there. And he just feels like someone who just doesn't get talked about enough when you look at what he actually does for this defense on the field.
Yeah, you took the words out of my mouth there with saying that Devon kind of was the same guy in a lot of ways. And then you go and you watch what Devon was able to do, but then still wasn't necessarily getting the mention. I think Ty is in that same mold. It's really easy. I think the more you go interior on the line, the less you get talked about, whether it's offensive or defensive. And it's just easy to kind of forget about guys like that. But if Ohio State is going to go from a good season to a great season to a special season, they're going to need a big performance out of somebody like Ty Hamilton. And he's certainly been kind of right there on the cusp. What does he look like getting 15, 20 more snaps a game? Maybe we'll see. We'll see what that looks like. But I think that he's somebody that very much fits the list, even if we didn't have him on the initial cut.
Yeah, and he's someone who, he will be an impact player this fall. That's pretty much a guarantee. If he's healthy, he's going to be an impact player for them in the middle of that defensive line. Someone else who could be an impact player on the edge of the defensive line, or maybe the middle of the defensive line, depending on where the jack end lines up, is Mitchell Melton. And he's someone who he has really not played. He's really not, I was just quickly Googling his stats, and he has no stats. He has really not played for Ohio State over the years. He looked for all the world like he was about to become an impact player in the spring of 2022 and then blew out his knee during the spring game and then missed all of last season, missed this spring as well. But what kind of pushes Mitchell Melton onto this list for me is how Jim Knowles talks about him and what Jim Knowles is doing about Mitchell Melton. And they look at Mitchell Melton as a sure enough thing at that jack position, that they moved Jack Sawyer back to that traditional defensive end spot, so no more jack spot for Jack. And they basically didn't run the jack this spring because Mitchell Melton wasn't going to be there, and Mitchell Melton is going to be that guy. They are so sure that Mitchell Melton's going to be that guy that they move a former five-star in Jack Sawyer off of that spot. They have another guy who's a five-star, CJ Hicks, who's probably number 2 at that position right now. But they feel so confident in Mitchell Melton at that jack spot that they're essentially just running the whole position around his availability. That to me suggests they know something that we have not gotten to see yet.
Yeah, absolutely. The fact that we didn't see the jack over the spring because of Melton's absence of being able to go through the physical demands of spring ball as he's coming off of that very significant injury, is telling. And you got to wonder what Ohio State's defense would have looked like last year if Mitchell Melton didn't get hurt, since they were talking him up last year. And it'll be interesting because it's a situation of, it's the Leo position. Well, no, that's the king of the jungle. You've got to earn that title. It's the Jack position. Well, we haven't heard it talked about as the Leo. If we see a couple games of Mitchell Melton out there, does the position morph back into the other name? And again, it's all ball bearings at that point. We're just, a name is a name is a name. It doesn't matter. You're just one of 11 players out there on the field at the time. But you look at what, the physical attributes of Melton, and you can see it there. You can see somebody who seems to fit the position. We just haven't had a chance to see him. We just haven't had a chance to see him in the position. So it'll be interesting, especially through the first 3 games going into Notre Dame, to see what that looks like, and then that real first test, which comes week 4 in South Bend.
And we did not get to see Mitchell Melton last year because of injury, and last year we did get to see Jair Brown due to injury. They had so many injuries at the corner position that Jair Brown, as a true freshman, started that Wisconsin game, which was the end of September, very beginning of October. He was the first true freshman to start at corner for Ohio State, go in basically a year, because Denzel Burke did it, but going back before that, boy, it does not happen very often. And yes, it only happened because of injury, but when he was out there, he looked pretty darn good. He looked like he belonged out there. He did not stick out at all as a true freshman corner, playing in the Big Ten, playing in primetime on national TV, basically a month into his Ohio State career. So this year, yes, you've got Denzel Burke. Yes, you've got Jordan Hancock. Yes, you've got Davis Nigbinosin. But it feels like while people are looking at the top 2 there, and then you've got the transfer from Ole Miss, number 3, Igbinosin, I think Jair Brown is getting overlooked, and he's someone who could end up in this rotation, not necessarily starting, but in that rotation playing really meaningful minutes, and it feels like he's a little bit of a forgotten man in that rotation right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he did look good in the limited action that we did see out of him last year. He certainly got a start because of the injuries and everything else. And I think last year taught us that everybody's got to be ready. And it's not like the corner room is significantly deeper in terms of numbers this year. The corner room is significantly deeper, I think, in terms of experience, but they're not necessarily sitting there with 4 more corners than they had in the previous season. And, we'll see what happens as, some of the summer enrollees start to get into the mix and what happens with them. But Jair Brown has that starting experience, has a year in the system. I think he's going to be somebody who is going to get called upon to play some big minutes along the way, just out of necessity, because again, sometimes you have to make moves with corners. To play corner successfully, you have to have a short memory. Well, if you don't have a short memory in a game, and it's kind of a situation of where you're hung up on a play you gave up and you have to go in and make a move, to sit there and say, all right, well, we got to change our luck here a little bit. Jair's got to be ready to step into that role.
And the last spot I wanted to talk about is that slot corner / nickel safety kind of role. And there's 2 guys there that I feel like could really fit the bill That was Tanner McAllister's spot a year ago. He was there for just 1 year, the former transfer from Oklahoma State. Then now he is gone, and now that's going to be Cameron Martinez and or Jihad Carter most likely this year. And really, both of those guys could kind of fit in this conversation. Cam Martinez, I'm going to talk about trying to forget a bad play. He had a very high-profile bad moment against Michigan last year, but he is someone who has been on this roster and part of this team for quite a while, and seems like he is the level of faith that the defensive coaches have in him is pretty high. So it feels like that if you can make that one bad moment a little bit of an anomaly and put it behind you, like you were just talking about, that could be a big impact thing. And then they just brought in Jihad Carter as a transfer from Syracuse. This spot was a transfer safety from one school that wore orange last year in Tanner McAllister. Now it's another guy who could be in that role, Jihad Carter, transferring from the orange at Syracuse. But Jihad Carter had basically half the spring and then hurt his knee and missed the rest of the spring. And so I think he's a little bit of a forgotten man too there, where you came into the spring thinking, okay, maybe this is his job to lose. And then you just sort of out of sight, out of mind for the second half of spring ball. So, it could be either one of these guys. It could be both of these guys at that spot this fall.
I was going to say, do you walk into the season and say, I know how corner is going to be played. I know what that starting lineup is going to be. I don't. I'm not sure of anything. And yes, Jihad Carter did get hurt in spring, and you got to wonder how the recovery has been and everything else. And you're not getting any quote unquote team minutes right now until you get into fall practice. But again, when you play three safeties, that doesn't mean, in terms of your, of your system of how things are looking when you're playing, essentially a nickel. How do things work out there? How are the minutes set up? I mean, we've certainly seen the flashes out of Cam Martinez. I mean, he looks really good at times. I mean, obviously people are going to be more drawn to a couple of mistakes along the way, but I mean, how many of those were? I mean, some of them certainly were player led, and I think some of them were scheme led in terms of when you put guys in bad situations. I'm never going to stop hearing about Tough Borland in the championship game against Alabama, and that they just out schemed them at that point. But I think both these guys certainly are in a position to see some meaningful minutes. I think that you're going to have to see some tinkering in the lab over the first couple of weeks to figure out what the best crew is to be able to get your best 11 out there. But I think there are going to also be instances where you have to even make adjustments on that based on what it is you're facing. Because again, we have not necessarily talked about a Sonny Styles or somebody like that who certainly has to figure into the plan. So you just don't know. And there are going to be times where you might not see Carter or Martinez just based on what it is that they have to run.
Yeah, and if you're sitting there wondering, what about CJ Hicks? What about Sonny Styles? I mean, these are under-the-radar guys. Those guys have been above the radar for about 6 solid months now. We've been talking about them a whole bunch to the point where people are kind of wondering, why are you talking about them so much if they haven't played that much yet? Patience, you'll find out this fall. But that wraps up our under-the-radar series. Just guys who maybe are going to make a bigger impact on the field this fall than you might be thinking right now based on how much you're hearing their names right now in the Ohio State zeitgeist. So we'll be talking much more about those guys, about some of the higher profile players, about the Buckeye season on the whole, about Ohio State recruiting, and much, much more, all at BuckeyeHuddle.com this week. Lots of interesting stuff going on. And boy, we're only a couple weeks away now from Big Ten Media Days, the unofficial start of Ohio State football season, Big Ten football season, college football season. Yes, it is almost here. And while we are counting down the days to that, we're also counting down the days to a bunch of rather high-profile recruiting decisions that are coming up in the next month or so. Lots of stuff to track, all at BuckeyeHuddle.com, our team of X's and O's gurus, our team of team coverage guys, our team of recruiting coverage guys. We have a guy, we have more than one guy for all of it. You can find it all at BuckeyeHuddle.com. That will do it for today. Thank you guys all for joining us. Have a great day. We'll talk to you tomorrow.